Now, since the beginning of his presidency and ever since, there has been a large cohort of people in America and around the world who have been baying for the prosecution of Donald Trump and members of his family across a broad range of alleged criminal actions. And there have been a lot of false dawns. This week, though, there is yet another legal action against him. And this one is being seen as potentially one that has more teeth than the others that have preceded it. I'm joined by the Washington bureau chief for The Guardian, David Smith. This action, David, taken by Letitia James, the Attorney General for New York, it is a civil action, but does it have any more teeth than any of the previous attempts against Donald Trump?
I'd say the teeth are a little bit sharper now, based on what Letitia James told us this week. But it's still hard to be certain where all this is leading, and the prospect of Donald Trump in an orange jumpsuit standing trial in a court is still a very long distance away. But yes, certainly this was another blow to Trump in a court filing on Tuesday. Letitia James, who's the Attorney General of New York, said that she'd uncovered evidence of Trump's company using, quote, fraudulent or misleading, close quote, valuations of its skyscrapers, golf clubs, and other property to get loans and benefits. One striking example, Trump's company misreported the size of his penthouse in Manhattan, claiming it was nearly 3 times its actual size, which is a difference in value of about $200 million. Sort of humorous in a way, because we know Trump likes to boast and exaggerate everything. It's always the greatest, it's always the biggest. But this time that could land him in some legal and financial trouble.
Because the issue is that these valuations will have been used for things like tax statements, and they will have been used as part of his asset register against lending to the Trump organization. There's examples where assets that were purchased at $14 or $15 million suddenly found themselves independently valued up to 100 and something. That then leaped to 200 and something when it was written down. It's hardly Donald Trump standing over a warm body with a smoking revolver, though.
And yes, on your first point, that's right, that the court papers say, look, these exaggerations, these misrepresentations enabled Trump and his company to obtain economic benefits, including loans, insurance coverage, and tax deductions. But I also agree with your second point there that this is murky, fuzzy stuff to do with finances, to do with his pre-presidential life. It's not a very sort of clear smoking gun, the sort of thing that headline writers like. It can be complicated. There's actually a parallel investigation going on as well, with the district attorney in Manhattan, and a member of Trump's senior corporate staff is in trouble on that one to do with tax fraud. But yeah, I think for most people, this perhaps still plays second fiddle to, or what did Trump actually do in office? His actions led to hundreds of thousands of deaths, arguably on coronavirus, and also we have a political investigation currently going on regarding the January the 6th insurrection, where there might also be some criminal liability. So the net is closing in.
In the midst of which he has had further legal setbacks from his perspective, because the Supreme Court has put him back in his box fairly resoundingly.
Yes, Trump was trying to claim executive privilege, as presidents do, that what he said and did and wrote on the day of January 6, 2021, when, of course, we had the insurrection at the US Capitol, he argued was all protected and should remain secret, no public access. And that argument was this week thrown out by the Supreme Court, despite it having several Trump appointees. So those records are being handed over to a House of Representatives select committee investigating the events of that day. One of the big questions is, what did Trump know and when did he know it? How did he respond to the insurrection? Did he just sit there watching it on TV? Did he cheer it on? Could he have intervened? And indeed, in the 24, 48 hours beforehand, to what extent did he direct it? Did he have knowledge it was going to pan out that way? So these National Archives records being handed over is very bad news on that score. And interestingly, the committee just yesterday also requested that they interview Trump's daughter, Ivanka, who, of course, was a senior White House advisor. So again, the net is closing in there as well.
And there's interesting parallels in the implications in both actions, because the records being unsealed and being made public in the insurrection investigation is seen as a significant threat, because it ventilates that which has been held in the shadows. Likewise, the Letitia James action is seen as threatening for the same reason, because if I understand it correctly, there is a significant chance that she will be able to depose the former president, or if not him, Ivanka Trump and or Donald Jr.
Yes, that certainly could happen, and these very dogged investigators are chipping away. And I think perhaps the New York financial side of it is even more threatening, because the House committee in Washington is potentially running out of time. There are elections coming up. If Republicans win those as expected, that committee might be wound up, whereas Letitia James herself was considering a run for office but has rejected that so that she can concentrate on this work, and the New York prosecutors are not going anywhere. And obviously there are legal obligations for perhaps even Trump himself to show up and give it evidence. But as you say, it's a civil action, so we're still some way from genuine criminal prosecution here. I'm sure Trump is going to use every legal trick in the book, as he is known to do. And one shadow hanging over all of this that I think Letitia James and others are aware of is Trump's attempt to politicize this and weaponize it for his own campaign ends. They're all treading carefully, because they know a prosecution of Trump would immediately spark allegations from him and Republicans that this is all politically motivated. This is an attempt to derail a potential 2024 presidential campaign for him. And the two feed off each other. I think he might be more likely to run for office if it thinks it'll dig him out of legal trouble.
Well, on that topic, on the politics of it, first of all, how likely is it, do we think, that we will see a 2024 Trump candidacy? And if so, will he get through the primaries? And secondly, how has Joe Biden and the Democrats been so unable to capitalize on all of this? Because he's fairly deep in his own woes at the moment.
Yes. As you can imagine, it's an often debated point in Washington at the moment. Is Trump going to run again? And we've long given up trying to penetrate his consciousness or work out what goes on in Trump's brain. And of course, we have even less access to it these days since he was kicked off Twitter. And it goes back and forth. I'd have to say right now, if I had to bet, I think Trump probably will run again. He's back holding campaign rallies, did one in Arizona last weekend. He's clearly in the lead in the Republican primary nomination race. Tellingly, the Republicans were just sort of tinkering with the rules on presidential debates. That seems to be a Trumpian move. He does feel that sense of grievance about last time, and I think he genuinely believes he would win, because that comes on to your second question. He is fiercely critical of Biden for ruining the country. I think Trump believes he would be on a mission to rescue it and revert back to his approach to the presidency. It's hard for Biden to capitalize directly on Trump's legal woes, because that would be seen as political interference. Biden wants to restore the old way of doing things, where the Justice Department and Letitia James are independent and doing their own thing. And the last thing they need is an incumbent president weighing in and gleefully mocking Trump's problems. But yes, it is extraordinary that despite everything we've talked about with Trump and the way the Republican Party completely yielded to him, and many would say has just gone off the rails and abandoned democracy and embraced authoritarianism, they're doing pretty well in the polls. They're on course to retake the House of Representatives, got a decent shot at beating Biden the next presidential election. And I think there has been a messaging problem there, that Biden and the Democrats have not been able to turn people's attention to the Republican side. Biden, I think, literally in the last couple of weeks has tried to do that more. And in his marathon press conference on Wednesday, he asked repeatedly, what are Republicans for? What actual policy agenda do they have except to to criticize and worship Trump's cult of personality. So I think they are waking up to that now, that in the midterms they are going to have to return fire on the Republicans. But, generally the public do focus their concerns and anxieties on whoever's in office at the time. So Biden will inevitably get the blame for the ongoing pandemic, for inflation, for a perceived crisis at the border, for rising crime,
gas
and
prices.
so on. It's tough then to get out of that. Yeah, all of it.
David, it's a pleasure. David Smith, Washington Bureau Chief for The Guardian. Thank you very much.
The Anton Savage Show
on News Talk.